Side of the Trackmobile, and never take this radiator cap off with the radiator water hot. You always want to make sure that the engine is cold, and feel the radiator and cap, and again, be careful because it could be hot enough to burn the skin. But if the engine's hot and or the radiator's hot, it'll be full of scalding water. So make sure the engine's cool when you check the fluid level. To do that, all you do is remove the cap and look down in the neck of the radiator to make sure that there's liquid in the top of the radiator itself. This is a approximately 50-50 mix of antifreeze and water, but you want to use ethylene glycol antifreeze in this system, and I would set it for whatever the temperature conditions at this particular location may be. At the factory, they're set at 50-50 mix of ethylene glycol and water. The engine oil dipstick is located on this side of the Trackmobile, and I'll get up on the deck here with Jim Postel of Knott Company. Knott Company is your servicing Trackmobile dealer, and Jim's located in St. Cloud. And that engine oil dipstick location is right there. And there's a low and a full mark on that dipstick. As presently supplied by the Trackmobile 40 factory, we're running a straight 40 weight engine oil in this system. We have checked with the local Detroit diesel dealer, which I believe is Interstate, and they have authorized us to use straight 30 weight oils, but do not use multi-grade oils in this system. The 30 weight oil, they said, is permissible in winter conditions. Also, while we're up here on this same location, down on this side of the engine under the alternator is the fuel filter for the Detroit diesel engine. And then we have the engine oil filter, which is a spin-on oil filter located right here in the center of the picture. Moving over to the hydraulic tank, which is right here. This is your main hydraulic tank, and we'll give you the fluid levels for all the hydraulic systems. Somebody's tightened up the small cap. This is the dipstick cap for the system, and the large one to the side of it is the breather for the hydraulic tank itself. Here we have a filter, and this is the filters are manufactured for Trackmobile, and this particular filter assembly has a dirt indicator on the top of it so that you can tell when the filter becomes dirty visually. Now, located beside the plastic tag, incidentally, in that hydraulic tank is the correct oil is a C3 10-weight motor oil. Now, for the transmission, we're also using C3 10-weight oil. Torque converter and transmission fill point use type C3 transmission oil only. I'll turn the camera around. That may be better for you, the way you're looking at it. And the fill location is right beside the tag. So that's at the back side of the engine, and I'll back up the camera now so you can see where that fill point is in relationship to the remainder of the machine. We're going to take a look now, shoot across the engine, and I'll show you the fill point for the master cylinder. This is a power brake unit on the machine, and we want to use .3 brake fluid in this system, and this is the location for the fill for the master cylinder. Your air compressors, that's good. The air compressor filter are located where Jim's pointing now, and you want to keep these filters clean on this air compressor so that it sucks air easily through those filters and pumps air into your air system. If the filters become clogged and or dirty, what will occur is that the compressor is still trying to pump, but it starts drawing air past the compressor piston rings and will begin to load up your air system with excess oil. So make it a point to keep these inlet filters on this V-style 24 CFM Bendix Westinghouse compressor clean. This is a gear-driven compressor off the engine. One additional thing we want to look at while we're on this side of the engine, this engine was spec'd out with a shutdown system as an option on the engine, but it does not have a purpose in this particular situation, but we want to show you the flipper in case it was accidentally tripped. You'd push down on the bottom portion of the flipper, and that's in the very center of the viewfinder right now. Let me back it up so that it will be visible. And that's that small round tube-looking device that's sticking downward. I can't see with your hand in the way, Jim. Thank you. And that'll relock the system. So this is what you want it to look like when it's in its correct and or running position. You want the tube-looking device straight downward and the device with a little pinhole in it at a 90-degree or right angle to it. There's a slight cam there that it sets in. But at any rate, if that was tripped in the wrong direction mechanically for any reason, what would occur is the engine would try to start and die and try to start and die, and you'd have to reset it before the engine would begin to run. Pointed out that this particular machine is equipped with a block heater for the Detroit diesel engine and also a block heater for the hydraulic system. So these two items need to be plugged in on cold evenings if the machine is going to be stored outside in cold weather. And the block heater, of course, will bring the engine up to temperature so that the diesel will fire. One of the recommended ways to start a diesel in particularly cold weather is to rotate the engine approximately 5 RPM with the T-handle pulled out, and that'll help eat, with the compression ratio being approximately 22:1 in the engine, that'll help heat the air inside the engine, and then push down on the T-handle, which will start to supply fuel into the engine. And if she's going to fire in cold weather, that should be the best and most efficient way to do it. If that doesn't do it, after a few revolutions, stop for about 30 seconds and try to restart in that manner again and see if it'll take off. We found that if you typically start cranking these Detroits, for some reason you need to give it a waiting period of perhaps 30 seconds for pressures or something to equalize inside these engines before they start, but it's just a strange feature of these things in cold weather. Again, the suggested way to start a diesel engine is with the engine block heater, the hot water bottle. If you do have to add ether to start this engine, make sure that the engine is cranking before you inject ether into the air cleaner. Otherwise, you can overload the air cleaners and crack the heads on the diesel engines. We're now going to show you, since it was most difficult to do, in this particular scenario, you want to put blocks under the Trackmobile before you check the transmission fluid, but we'll show you the location for checking the fluid level in this Allison transmission. We're going to do it from this point of view just due to camera angle. So the camera angle is, there's a petcock on the face of the transmission. I can get it, Jim. And that petcock location, I'll try to zoom in on it here, is in the center of your screen now. So the correct way to check that fluid level in the transmission would be to have your machine in neutral, parking brake engaged, sufficient blocking to hold a 14,000-pound machine, and with the engine running oil hot, as you open that petcock, you should get a slight drip of oil out of the petcock, indicating that the fluid level is correct in the transmission. If not, then you would go up on top to the plastic placard that's marked C3 transmission fluid and fill the transmission at that point until the oil does begin to drip out of the petcock down here on the bottom. So this is for transmission fill for the Trackmobile. Corner of the machine, we have the track gear case. And Jim's going to run the pointer to the track gear case. And the fill level for that gear case is up on top of the deck. I got it, Jim. And it's going to be this is a breather and fill point. This round painted breather right here is the fill point for the track wheel gear case. And then down on the side of the gear case itself, on the inboard side, there's a fluid level plug It's on the side of the gear case that will determine the correct level of the gear oil in that case. The level on the Trackmobile is the rear differential for the highway tires, and this is brought up to where the differential is at its correct level, and then the fluid level plugs will be taken out and the gear oil checked in this box as well. Now we're going to show you a couple of grease fittings on the machine that are critical to the operation of the machine, and these will be for the lithium-based grease. The side rods have grease fittings on them, and we recommend that if you're using these machines heavily, that the side rods be greased once a week, or at least sufficient grease to keep all the needle bearings in these side rods lubricated. There's one side rod on each rail wheel, and consequently these things have a tremendous amount of torque on them and carry a tremendous amount of tonnage, so this is a very high friction point that you want to keep lubricated. Well, now I'll go show you another lubrication item that needs close attention as far as the greasing. On 3 out of the 4 rail wheels, there's a grease fitting for the rail wheel bearings, and we'll zoom in on this wheel. There's a grease fitting on one of these bearings for every wheel except the one that's at the gear case itself. I don't know if that's going to come in. Right there in the very center of the screen is a grease fitting for that rail axle bearing, and these need good grease since they also carry tremendous load. But this is one that many people miss, and eventually it'll require maintenance if you don't grease them. Take a look at the sanders. You have an air line coming into the sand valve, and then an air adjustment nut, and then a swivel nut. The Venturi tube nut is to the right, the swivel nut is the one to the left in the center of the screen at this time. Airline coming in from the top. As you back out the large nut on the Venturi, this will allow more sand to drop into the sand trap. Eventually, during certain weather conditions, sand will become wet or frozen, and in order to clean out the sand trap, you'll need to loosen these 2 9/16 bolt heads at the bottom of that plate. Swing the plate aside since it's notched on one side. Put a screwdriver up on either side of that Venturi tube and get the wet or frozen sand out of the valve until dry sand flows through it. Trackite, and the dealers carry a product called Trackite, which is an excellent adhesion factor. It's got a chemically dried sander, and so consequently that'll keep your sand as dry as you can possibly keep it. But this is a procedure for cleaning out the sanders. Once the sand starts to flow through the valve again, then you can close off the quick clean bottom trap and tighten the bolts down again. Okay, Jim Postle is going to show you how to set the Trackmobile down on the rail. You actually stop short of the rail itself. And then bring the machine forward. Okay, we're going to again approach the rail. You want to stop your machine short of the tracks. And then keep your machine in first gear, or this is one way to do it. Keep your machine in first gear and your foot on the brake. As the machine slowly lowers to the rail, you can then bring your machine forward. And the flanges will engage in the track. Now you must wait until the rubber tires have completely retracted, both front and rear. Keep your front steering wheels straight. Keep your front steering wheels straight and don't move your machine until your rubber tires are all the way up in the air, both on the front and the rear. And the reason for that is there's a drive joint on the back of the Trackmobile, and those back tires have to be completely retracted, because as you're bringing the machine up, the drive shaft is at such an angle that it would damage the drive shaft going to the rubber tires. So make sure your rubber tires are completely up in the air before moving the Trackmobile on the rail. Now on the front end, you want to look out, and from the operator's cab you can see your front tires. You want to wait and retract those front tires with the tires in the straight ahead position, not turned left or right. And the reason for that is that that'll keep these arms from hitting the guide plates. It's just much easier on your steering if you wait until the tires are straight ahead before you retract them. Retracted, you can run your Trackmobile down the track. In this particular instance, we're going to have to throw the switch because the switch down there is not thrown so that we can travel through it. You want to go very slowly when your flangeways are full of snow and ice, particularly at your highway traffic crossings, because at sub-zero temperatures or freezing temperatures, this snow and ice can get so hard that it acts just like concrete and can either derail the railroad car and or derail the Trackmobile. So go through the frozen snow and ice very cautiously until you have it all broken out of the flangeways, thus ensuring that your railroad car and Trackmobile will be staying on the track. This is most important during extreme cold weather conditions. They're now going to throw that switch and bring the Trackmobile in on this other track, and we'll show you how to couple up the Trackmobile. Always keep your machine moving slowly and under control. You have a lot of plant traffic at these crossings, and I've noticed during this filming today that the highway trucks will run back and forth across those rails without slowing down or even looking or stopping. They're not accustomed to having any movement out here aside from locomotives, so you're going to have to probably, at least for the time being, give traffic the right-of-way, although due to the weight of your cars, a semi-truck has much greater stopping capability than railroad trains do. But you're going to have to travel slowly enough in this plant to allow people to compensate for you. You may have your safety committee determine who has the right-of-way, either the railroad cars and or the semi-trucks or vehicle traffic here, and my recommendation would be that vehicle traffic can stop. 130-ton rail cars cannot stop quickly, so vehicle traffic should stop for the railroad. Now we're going to show you how to couple up the Trackmobile. Approach the car slowly. And you'll want the weight transfer pad of the Trackmobile under the pad of the railroad car. There's a handle up inside the cab of the Trackmobile that you can position. Now put your machine in the opposite direction of travel to make sure that your couplers are locked before you take weight transfer. In this case, they're not, so you want to raise up your coupler slightly. And bring the machine in again. And put your machine in the opposite direction of travel. And test the couplers before you do weight transfer again. Okay, in this case we've locked up our couplers. So we can now take weight transfer on the car. If you don't check to make sure you're locked, what will happen is that it'll pull the coupler off the pad as you start to pull away. So as the hydraulic ram on the Trackmobile extends, it'll lift up to approximately 42,000 pounds from a loaded railroad car and relieve itself hydraulically at the Trackmobile. Now on an empty car, you only want to raise the car coupler until it contacts the sill of the coupler, S-I-L-L, and at that point raise the rail car body approximately 1 inch only. You don't want to raise it too high, otherwise it can lift the body up off the truck assemblies of the rail wheels. So this is a loaded car, so we've raised it all the way up. and we're going to leave the handle toward its full hydraulic position, and that'll compensate for track dips in the rail and give it full hydraulic power regardless of any dips in the rail. If you're running an empty car, you want to raise that to where the car coupler picks the empty body up approximately 1 inch, put the handle back into hold position as far as the hydraulic lift, and that way it won't raise the car any further as you're traveling down the tracks. In the normal sequence of events, we would then couple up the rail car hoses, put the machine in neutral, parking brake engaged, couple up our air hoses between the Trackmobile and the railroad car. We're going to do the rail car air brakes in a separate segment of this tape, so we won't do that now. So we're going to just show you how to slowly run this without doing the air brake portion on this particular part of the tape. Okay, we're going to just hook up one car here just to show you typically what it looks like. Snow is starting to fill the camera up, so. Now in this particular scenario, what you want to do is you want to apply track height to the tracks about 100 feet before you get to the car. So you want to sand before you ever couple up. Otherwise, once you get coupled up to the car, you can't apply sand to the track. Go real slow here because the tracks are slick and we don't have any air brakes hooked up for this little video. We always recommend for safety that the air brakes hook up and a test brake application be made before attempting to stop any car. I'm now going to stop him by waving my hand and put him in the reverse direction of travel. So he'll come back to us now. Again, you can see the importance of making sure that you cut through the frozen snow and ice in your flangeways to keep your cars and your Trackmobile from derailing during sub-zero winter conditions. And then the next step we'll do is we'll go up inside the cab and show you what the controls look like prior to startup, and then physically when we're running down the track. If we've got enough camera battery, we'll have to do that. Inside the cab of the Trackmobile, and Jim and I will sit down and go through the location of various items with you. I guess we'll start at the top of the cab and show you where the sander switches are. There's two switches up here that'll provide sand in a given direction of travel, either fore or aft of the rail wheels. You've got a courtesy light for night operations. By pushing in on the pin, that'll illuminate the light. By pushing again, that'll turn the courtesy light off. You've got a spotlight up on top of the cab. You've got a chain that goes to your air horn. And then this next one over is a windshield wiper. The control is mounted on the windshield for that. Coming down to the dash, you have your two controls. The far lever, and we're going to reshoot that segment. The handle on the far left operates the Trackmobile coupler down a neutral position for an empty car. Again, you want to lift up on an empty car about 1 inch and then put your handle in neutral position. The full up position is for a loaded car, and that will compensate for bad track conditions and give you full hydraulic weight transfer. From a loaded car, you should experience about 40,000 pounds of weight transfer from the loaded car over to the Trackmobile drive wheels for maximum traction. The next handle over extends and retracts your Trackmobile rubber tires, and that's this handle. So again, you want your Trackmobile, when you extend the tires downward, you want your Trackmobile in neutral, foot under foot brake, and as the rubber tires come down, it will lift the Trackmobile up in the air. One end will lift at a time. You ideally would like to have some clearance when that occurs between your Trackmobile and the end of the building, so take your Trackmobile out to an open space so that that can occur, because as the Trackmobile comes up, it may come up forward or reverse depending on the path of least resistance for the hydraulics. Let's go down through the gauges. I'm going to shoot these gauges over the engine. Hopefully the voice will come out, the audio will come out. This is the transmission torque converter, and this wants to be in the green. This is a temperature sense gauge. This wants to be in the green. In the event that it does get out of the green, you have exceeded 250 degrees. If 250 degrees is reached, stop working the unit. To cool the converter, place transmission in neutral and run the engine in half throttle until gauge reaches 160 to 180 degrees. Additionally, make sure you keep an eye, and don't do it with the system hot, but make sure that you have sufficient radiator coolant in the radiator and sufficient transmission fluid in the transmission so that the transmission will operate correctly and coolly. If the engine radiator water is low, or if the transmission oil is low, it could cause torque converter overheating. Moving across, you have an hour meter for maintaining your machine. The next one over is oil pressure for your diesel engine. As you can see right now, you're operating at about 15 psi. And this is with the oil hot after having idled the machine for a period of time. Out on the track at high RPM, I'll increase the engine RPM here for a moment. But that engine RPM should increase and carry about 50, in this case about 52 psi. So you're carrying excellent engine oil pressure on this unit. The gauge to the right is for fuel. Put only diesel fuel in this machine. This is a 453 Detroit diesel, 4-cylinder, 2-cycle, and takes diesel fuel only. Don't put anything in the diesel fuel tank outside the cab door of the machine where the green cap is other than diesel fuel. Coming down, we have the next gauge down is the engine water temperature. This looks like we're running about 155 degree thermostat. That's where this engine's been setting all day. Next gauge over is your ammeter. In order to get this ammeter to charge, you need to give a slight blip on the throttle after the engine's warmed up a bit in the morning. As this alternator is RPM sensed, the alternator will not start charging until it senses a certain engine RPM, and then it'll pick up and begin to charge, and you can let it go back to idle at that point. But this is an RPM excited alternator. The next gauge over is your transmission. Yep, wait a minute, I'm losing it. Transmission clutch pressure. And you'll want it right here in the green where it is. And I think that on this Allison, this has got an Allison CRT 3000 series transmission in it. And I believe the correct PSI is about 175 PSI. I'll have to check the book on that. Let's go through your switches. Your windshield wipers on the far left. By pulling up on that, that'll engage the front windshield wipers. Parking brake warning light. When your parking brake is pulled up, a red light and a buzzer will come on. Do not operate the Trackmobile or do not move it on the track or the highway with that red light and buzzer on, otherwise you'll burn up the drum and shoe parking brake. The next item over is the headlight on the face of the Trackmobile for the road. The next one is the track lights for on the rail. Your ignition switch is down to the right of this viewfinder, and directly above it is the push button for the engine starter. We're now going to move across the steering column. This is equipped with a TRW power steering system. And you've got the cab heater on the Trackmobile. We're going to shut that down, or actually shut it off now. And in this particular case, in order to shut this machine off, now that we've looked at all the gauges, I'm going to turn the ignition switch to the off position. You'll note that the diesel still runs. And you need this ignition switch on so that it completes the electrical circuit on the machine. You can see the lights come on when the electrical switch goes on. So this needs to be on. To shut the engine off, turn the key straight up and down, pull out on the T-handle, that'll stop your Trackmobile. You've got a low air pressure warning alarm system. Since the Trackmobile operates an air system both for the railroad cars and the Trackmobile brakes, you've got air over hydraulic brakes on the Trackmobile, and that's the purpose of the low air sensor. The Trackmobile coupler release black rubber button is right in the center of your viewfinder now, and you need to push in and hold on that in order to release the Trackmobile from the railroad car after you've parked it. You always want your coupler fully down in order for that to happen. So you take your weight transfer down, push in and hold on your coupler release button, and then put your machine in the opposite direction of travel from your railroad car. If you simply push in on that button and release it again, it will relock the coupler. So you need to have the coupler release button fully depressed as you're pulling away from the car, and have all the slack off the knuckle so that the air cylinder can retract and allow your Trackmobile knuckle to open. Coming around here, we're going to just do a brief show you where the railcar air brakes are at, since we want to put that on a separate tape or separate segment of a tape. And the gauge to the right is the main air reservoir pressure, which is 120 psi. The gauge on the left, if you were hooked up to a train line on a car, would be 90 psi. Again, this handle, and you'll leave this handle in its downward position to stop airflow going out the hose when your Trackmobile's running around separated from the car as we are now. Down on the side of the cab, we have the Trackmobile coupler, and by moving this handle back and forth, this will, if I can get a picture of it, and I cannot right now, maybe I can there, this will move the Trackmobile coupler left and right. At any rate, when you're traveling on the highway, what you want to do is, when you're in your highway position, you want to flip this little lever up so that the weight of the coupler head won't move the handle back and forth and hit your kneecap as you're traveling. When you're on the rail, you want this lever unlocked so that the coupler can float, and this handle will move as you go through a switch turnout so that your coupler can float and follow the railroad car coupler to allow it to go through the curves and switch turnouts. Your parking brake is down here on the side of your cab, and moving around, your accelerator pedal is to the right. Your power brake pedal is to the left in this viewfinder. Your cab heater is located right here, and your Trackmobile safety manual is located right here. This is also the operator's manual for the Trackmobile. This safety manual and written material supersedes this videotape, so make certain that you read through this book. There's a lot of information in here, and we want you to understand it. So before you operate your Trackmobile, make sure that you've read and understand the operator's manual, and have read and understand all the warnings on the caution and warning labels here. Now, your transmission shift controls are located here. To get up where we can see them, you have a forward or left position, neutral, reverse or right. Keep in mind it may be, depends on if you're on rail or highway on this machine. Neutral, low, intermediate, and high as far as your speeds on the two different levers. So the inboard lever, the left-hand lever in this viewfinder, is your speed control. The right one is your directional control. And I'm shooting from the operator's seat position right now. So those are the basics of your Trackmobile, and I hope that this will be of some value to you. Back to these shift controls for a moment. Do not, under any conditions, move your Trackmobile on the rail unless the rubber tires have completely retracted. Again, that means that the rubber tires are completely retracted. The little shift plunger will go into the transmission so it stops the power to the output shaft for the highway tires. So don't move your Trackmobile on rail until the rubber tires have completely retracted, and keep your steering wheel straight, and do not get any human beings between the rubber tires and any sheet metal or pinch points on the machine. Do not use the Trackmobile transmission to downshift. You can upshift from first to second to third gear as long as you take your foot off the accelerator to upshift the Trackmobile. Do not downshift the Trackmobile and or use the transmission for a reverse or a brake in the Trackmobile. This will damage primarily the drive shaft on the transmission. Hopefully would be the weak point, but it could damage other components inside the transmission itself, requiring expensive repair. So the transmission is strictly to be upshifted. If you need to change gears, we want you to bring the machine to a stop using the railcar air brake system, place the machine into her lower gear, and or start out in first gear and proceed from there. Keep in mind that the most important thing about railcar moving is not how many cars you can move, but how many cars you can stop. And pay particular attention in this plant area that you have railroad traffic crossing your rails. And since there are no electronic devices out there to warn people of car movement, you're going to have to depend on slow speeds and to make sure that people are aware of your presence. I would recommend establishing a safety practice, perhaps with some signs out there warning traffic that the railroad has the right-of-way in this plant. I believe that'll cover most items. I'll get outside and go through a quick visual check and see if we can think of anything else.